Hey everyone, I'm Jad. It's nice to see you again, and this is Khayshe. If you've seen some of the previous videos, she was a small kitten. Now she's still small, but at least she helps a lot with work. So this video is about web components, and I'm gonna talk about lit, or you can find it on lit.dev. You may have heard that Photoshop has recently come to the web. It's still in beta at the moment, but the entire Photoshop website is built using WebAssembly, and for the UI components, they are using a library called lit. This used to be called lit element, which you would combine with lit HTML, but now we just call it lit. And I'm a big fan of web components. I use it myself in all of my courses. It makes my life very easy. And even though I don't have any employees at the moment, should I ever consider to hire anyone, it would not take me a while to hire anyone who just knows JavaScript. Because learning web components and lit doesn't require so much time. I think you can teach someone in a week or 2 weeks and that's it. Whereas if you think about other libraries like React, it does take a while to make people understand JSX, hooks, use effect and use state and all the complications that goes behind it. This is not to say that it's not a good framework, it's very popular, etc. But I'm here to tell you why I've personally considered web components and lit for my platform. There are a few more benefits that I want to talk about, and one of them is that it works on all browsers. Web components are a browser technology, so we don't need any library to work with web components directly. But I'm going to show you in a bit that working with web components is a bit too low level, so we do need a small library on top of it, and that's going to be lit. But this all makes it very close to the web platform. So these are features in the browser and you are using a small library on top of it. You are still very close to the metal. You are still very close to the browser. And that has many benefits itself. The library will be small and that means it will be faster to load the first time. There's a lot less to learn, which means you can hire developers and make them learn web components and lit very easily. And it also means you either don't need build tools or need a very minimal build tools. With lit, it is possible to run it without build tools, but you will most likely require build tools to be able to import packages, to be able to compress files together, etc. And you also have TypeScript support, which is completely optional. And I'm gonna show this at the end. So let's start with web components and just web components. If you're an existing team, you can use web components in conjunction with whatever other library you're using. For example, React, Vue, Angular. You can also use web components with your library. Depending on your use case, one of the most common benefits would be that you are able to share these web components entire all your projects. Even if your projects were written in React, Vue, and Angular, the web components will just work throughout all the projects because it's a browser technology. And just in case you don't know what's a web component is a set of web APIs that allow you to create a reusable and encapsulated component. And by encapsulated, we mean more or less closed from the outside world. We especially think about CSS here, that the CSS you apply to this component will not apply to the rest of the page. There are some things that pierce what we call the shadow DOM, like some inherited properties such as the font family. You are still able to override these, but when writing CSS, it's actually a beautiful joy because you just write H2, you just write P, and you're only targeting the paragraph or the H2 that is inside of this component, not all the paragraphs inside of the web page. This does have a downside, and I'll talk about it towards the end. Web components are supported on all major browsers. You can see that on Can I Use over here. So I'm going to be using my own course or platform to show you to write a web component because I already have lessons on it, so then I can just follow the challenges. So I'm going to go to this challenge, and while I solve them, I'm going to explain what I'm doing. So this is the browser tab over here, and the index of the HTML, we just have a paragraph, and we have this app navbar. This app navbar over here is a custom element. And a custom element is an element that you as a developer are able to create on the web page. You can call it wherever you want, as long as there's a dash in the name. This is to prevent collision with future elements that will be created by the browser. So it always has to be 2 words. In this case, we have an app-navbar, and if I remove the code, right-click, inspect the browser, you have a completely empty element. That's because we haven't defined this custom element. So how do we define this custom element? Well, we're going to create a class. You can call it whatever you want. I'll call it app navbar, and it has to extend So it has to inherit all the properties from HTML element. And this is an interface that every single element on your web page, like paragraphs, H1s, H2s, they all inherit from it. And because you're creating a new element, a new custom element, you also have to inherit from it, right? So we create this class, and then you have to register this class. You kind of have to bind it with this new element. So then we use window.customelements.define. And what is the name of the element? It's going to be app-navbar. This has to match 100% this element here. And which class will represent this element? It's going to be app-navbar. And now you can see, if I inspect this element again, it still looks the same, even though it's now registered, but it's an empty custom element. Once we attach a shadow DOM to it, which I'm going to explain next, you're going to be able to see that this custom element will contain a shadow DOM. So let's attach a shadow DOM. And what's a shadow DOM? A shadow DOM is a part of the DOM that is created inside of this custom element, and the styles will only be applied to this part of the DOM. And that's one of the reasons why it's called shadow DOM. To create a shadow DOM, we have to create a constructor, but because we're extending from HTML element, we also have to call the constructor of HTML element, and you can do that with super, the keyword super. And then over here I can, let's just say, for example, app navbar created. And you can see here, every time it reloads, every time the page reloads, we're gonna get app navbar created. So now let's remove this and let's create this dot attach shadow, and I'm gonna go with mode open. You have two modes. You have mode open and mode closed. For the CSS, it's always going to be only applied to this part of the shadow DOM. The only difference between open and close is whether you are able to access it from JavaScript. And I've never had to use the mode closed. This is usually, I think, for like how the browser implements the video element itself as the custom element. So you'll most likely always go with mode open, unless for some reason you want to prevent it from being accessed from JavaScript. So when I create this attach shadow and I inspect the element again, we see app navbar here has a shadow root. So this is our custom element and this is the shadow root. So this is the place where the shadow DOM has been inserted, but again, it's still empty. So for that, I'm gonna go into the connected callback, and the connected callback is a callback function. It's in this case, it's a callback method on the app navbar that is automatically called by the browser when your custom element is added to the page. So you can also verify that, console log, connected, and if you add two console log, this will always come after the constructor because the class is instantiated by the browser and then added to the DOM. And actually, if the element is added more than once, then the connected callback will run several times. So in this connected callback, I can access this shadow DOM here with the this.shadow root. It might look a bit like magic. We did not create this.shadow root, but this is property on HTML element, and you can access it whenever you call attach shadow. Now on this.attach shadow, I can look at the inner HTML. I can change the inner HTML and say, let's add a paragraph. This is my navbar. And now the element over here shows this is my navbar. This is the content of the shadow DOM. And if I add some styles, if I add style, and I change the paragraph to make it green, notice how it only affects the elements inside of this shadow DOM, inside this shadow root over here. It does not leak out of the shadow boundaries, as we say, and affect other P elements outside. And that's beautiful because you will have a file, or maybe one file for the JavaScript, one file for the CSS, and you don't have to look throughout your entire code base. You know that the paragraph will match this paragraph. I can also give it class, IDs, all of this works. Now, this is not the best way to create components, and moreover, we don't really have a way to like create dynamic values. So what if I want this to be some kind of dynamic value that maybe it's coming from an attribute or coming from some kind of state? We don't really have a way to do that with web components, at least at the time of recording. And this is one of the main reasons why I would consider using something like lit.dev, because you will still be creating web components, but with some small sugar on top, things that make your life easier. And one of the most important features of this is a templating engine. And it's quite small. It says here weighing around 5 kilobytes. We can also double check with Bundlephobia. I love this website. Lit. You see this is 16 kilobytes minified and less than 6 kilobytes minified plus gzip. And I think this is referring to Brotli with Brotli. But at the end of the day, I always try to look at this, because at this number, the 16.4 minified, because no matter how small you compress it, the browser will have to decompress it, and then you're going to end up with quite some JavaScript to run. If you compare this to Vue, that's a 64 compared to a 16. With React, you have to take a look at two libraries, React and React DOM, because you will need both of them. And yeah, unfortunately, it's quite massive. To be honest, I don't really know why it's that big. Maybe we can ask this wizard. No. Just like how I talked about before, you can have a code base in Vue, code base in Angular. If you're using web components via lit, so if you use lit to create web components, then you can also share these components across any project, as long as you include the lit library, of course. So the lit library is, say, 5 to 6 kilobytes or 16 minified, and then all the web component technology is just baked into the browser. Now, let's take a look at the basic features of lit. We're going to start with the same example that we had before, class app navbar that extends HTML element, and we use window.customelements.define. So if you want to use lit, you have to import a class called lit element from the lit package. So this, of course, assumes you have installed the lit package with npm install lit. Instead of inheriting from HTML element, you will have to inherit from lit element, because lit element will contain all the features of the lit library, most of the features of the lit library, and the class lit element itself will extend from HTML element, so you don't have to do that anymore. So our class app navbar extends lit element, and this stays the same because we are using web components. It's a browser feature, and all the library is providing for now is class lit element. So let's go ahead, right click and inspect this app navbar. Take a look over here. We have the app navbar custom element, but it also automatically attached a shadow root. So we don't have to attach a shadow root anymore. This is automatically done by lit. You are also able to override this if you need to, but you'll almost rarely ever need to. So now, how do we render stuff on the page? For that, I need to show you a small trick. If you've learned modern JavaScript, you probably already know about template strings. They are quite powerful because they work on multiple lines. Hello world. You can also have interpolation, and they have a hidden feature called tag template literals. So let me show you. Let's say we do hello 2.3, 2 plus 3. This is an interpolated expression, and hello world. And what you can do over here is you can pass the name of a function. I'm going to call it HTML, or I'm going to call it my test, just to show you that it can be whatever. I'm going to define this my test function, const my test equals, and it will take an array of the strings created by this template literal. So that's going to be hello with the space and then space word. And then every interpolated value will be passed as another parameter here. So I can spread all of them and say values. And if I console log the strings and run this again, nope, syntax error, you will see I get, this console log is now useless. So I will get an array of strings hello and word. And if I log the values, then I will get an array of all the interpolated values, which is here, 2 plus 3, 5. You get the end result, you don't get what has been interpolated. And that's actually brilliant, because the way lit uses it is it's able to know if the value has changed. So if the 2 plus 3 became 2 plus 4, then the value has changed over here. It knows that it needs to re-render, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's continue. Let's say we have a new date.getTime over here. You see these are the values over here, and you get an empty string here. I cannot see my notes anymore because somebody decided that this is the most comfortable space in the office. You don't really need to know this, but this was just an introduction to tell you that lit provides us with a tag template literal, and that is called HTML. And let me show you how it allows us to render things to the DOM. If you go back to the previous example, this is what we had over here. I can create a render function, and this render function is automatically called by lit whenever it needs to render, either the first time or because there has been a change. And here we have to return a template literal, let's say, but you have to tell lit that this is a template that you want to render on the page. So for that, you import the HTML, and this is a tag template literal, just like I showed you with my test. And you place it over here, and there you go. It's gonna render on the page. So if we inspect this, we have the app navbar, custom element, the shadow root, and the h1 and the p and the ul. You can also have styles. Everything just works. But this supports more features than just telling lit that this is a template you want to render. It supports a lot of powerful things, and I'm going to show you some of them today. So yeah, over here we have a user card element, and I'm using it more than once. That's the beauty of components in general, that you can reuse it multiple times. And I'm also passing an attribute over here, status equals free or status equals paid. Attribute key, attribute value. We can tell lit that we expect an attribute over here, which can also be set by a property. For that, we have to define the static properties instance variable, and now we can list every single property. So our only property over here is status, so we say status, and the type of it is string. There's a lot more things you can do over here, and it's not limited to strings. I will talk about this in a second, but a lot of people think that you can only pass strings in web components, but you can pass booleans, you can pass objects. I won't talk about everything except objects, just because this is a common misconception. And by just specifying this, you can now read this dot status, and it's going to give you the value of the attribute. Now, if you already know some JavaScript, you know that this is similar to get attribute status, but there are additional benefits of using these properties, because it will read the value from an attribute for strings and booleans, but you can also set it as a property. I will not go so much into the details between them, but if I get a reference of the element, I can set it as a property. So the element dot status equals something, or you can also change the property, the attribute, you can change a lot of things over here, but let's focus on the basics. So I will remove both of these, and over here I'm going to say the user, this dot status, is it free? Then I'm going to say, well, I'm just going to say this dot status. So user is free and user is paid. That's because we have two components and they have different values. Now look at the beauty of this. If I'm going to say console log render, we will see it twice because we have two components. And if I open DevTools and I change the attribute to free, you see the render method is called again, and the component re-renders. It re-renders using this new data. And this happens all automatically from lit, and that's quite cool. It's quite lit, you can say. And since I talked about it, if I find this element over here, I can read the status. I can also change it to paid, and it's also gonna update. It's gonna re-render, so that's quite cool. Now let's talk a little bit about passing objects, because a lot of people think this is not possible, but I'm just going to show you the end result over here. We define static properties, and that's going to be user, and the type of it is an object. And as an example, you find the card one, and that's this one, and you pass to it card1.user, and you pass to it an entire object, and you are able to receive an object. You don't have to JSON stringify it, you don't have to JSON parse it. And it's also possible to do it with an attribute, but for that I'm gonna have to show you that I'm gonna need to have a component inside of component, which I don't have set up today. So that's also quite cool. And for that I'm gonna go to the more or less the last major topic, and you're gonna see how we just learned how to make a counter. And honestly, in other technologies it takes quite a while to learn how to do a counter because so many things are involved. So let's go to the next challenge, and I'm going to show you this challenge where we have to create a counter, where if I click on add one, we will have to increase the counter. So let's remove all of this, start from scratch. So this is the view. We have counter 0 and we have a button add 1. And in the constructor, I'm gonna call super, and I'm gonna define a counter or a value. Let's just go with value equals 0. And if I run the test, we see that this is not working because we're not doing anything yet with it. Now, I always want this value over here to be based on this instance variable, this.value. So if I change this, let's say to 4, then it's gonna render 4. And now I'm gonna show you how we can add an event listener on the button declaratively. You just use the add symbol, which allows you to add an event listener. What type of event? That's going to be click. And then over here, you specify the name of the function, this handle click or handle increment. And now we define this handle increment function. And let's add a console log, clicked. And you get clicked every time you click on it. Notice that I did not call the function. Instead, I just passed the name of the function, a reference to it, because lit will call this function only when the user will click on it, so sometime in the future. Okay, so over here, I'm gonna say this.value plus plus or plus equals 1. And if I console log this.value, we're gonna see that it's incrementing. However, lit has no idea that we've changed this variable, so it's never calling the render method again. For that, you have to call this.request update, and now lit, you are notifying lit that you have made a change to a variable, and then you need to re-render. And now look, it's just gonna re-render. You might hate this at first. I personally don't mind it at all, but also if you're using TypeScript, there's an easy way to hide this, and I'm gonna show you in a minute. So some quick features also. Lit has its own lifecycle hooks, for example, first updated. And this is going to render only the first time the component has updated. You also have the updated, you also get the props. This will actually return a map dataset, which does not work in the console over here. But yeah, if I say console log updated, and now you can see first updated, and then every time it's going to call updated. There's a lot more features. I'm not going to cover all of them, but look, this is all the code you need to define a timer. And a lot of other frameworks require a lot more code. But not only a lot more code, you require a lot more logic and deep understanding of the framework to understand what's going on. I previously mentioned TypeScript, and I want to show you what happens if I copy this. So this platform does not support TypeScript, but if I go to the lit playground and paste all of this, it's in a TypeScript file, and we have the app counter over here. I'm going to start by refactoring to TypeScript. If you don't know TypeScript, you can skip this section. So this is going to be value equals 0, define it as an instance variable. All the rest is correct, so it already works. But if you want to use all the features of TypeScript, then we have to import the custom element decorator from lit decorators.js. And then you call this decorator, and then this is going to replace this line. So what is the name of the component? App counter. And remove this. They are exactly the same thing. So this add custom element decorator will register this class as app-counter. The one that I like is state. You also have property for the static properties, but I'm only going to show you state here. You can mark this instance variable as state, and then you will not have to call request updated anymore, because lit will call this automatically every time you change it. It will make a getter and setter for you. You will not see them, but it will just work. And that's it. Now, a quick note on styles. It's quite nice that all the CSS you apply will only be applied to this element, but if you're used to using a UI library, let's say like Bootstrap or Tailwind or any other library, then you will not be able to make all these classes work in every component. For example, btn primary or btn something else. For that, you'll have to import the library into every component and return it into the get styles getter function. So this is a bit of a challenge. A lot of people face in the beginning. I certainly was annoyed by this in the beginning, but once you create your own UI kit, then I don't think this becomes such a big deal, because whenever you want a button that is styled, you use app button. And that brings me to the next challenge that I have personally faced. And that is creating a UI kit can be a little bit challenging with forms and buttons. This might have changed now. I haven't really looked at, there's the form event, and to be honest, if I look back at it, I should have used something already ready. Like, I know the ing line is one of the best libraries for that. I didn't use it back then, but if I were to start from scratch, then I would use such library, because you will have accessibility baked in and you will have all the form elements working and you will still be able to customize them. So that's quite nice. Some other challenge working in big teams, so that doesn't apply to me, but if you are working in a big team, lit is a very small library. There's no guidelines or forced ways on how to pass data. You can use Redux with it if you like. I'm definitely not the kind of person who uses Redux. You can use whatever you want, but just don't expect that this is like a full-fledged framework like Angular, where it's very clear where everything needs to go. No, it's just a very small casual library for creating web components. And personally, for the scale that I work with, being one developer on the team, I manage around 100 components for 3 or 4 courses, and that's perfectly manageable because the library is so small. So yeah, I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial. Let me know what you think about it, what kind of videos you want me to make next. And if you like the platform, that's learnjavascript.online. It's going to be linked below. That's my course. You can follow it, you can learn about JavaScript. And there are 2 optional chapters about web components and lit if you want to get started. You can also follow my other courses, reacttutorial.app, learnprogramming.online, which is for absolute beginners. And in a couple of months, I'm going to be launching my 4th course. That's going to be learnhtmlcss.online. You can already visit the link to enter your email to be notified when it's launched. And I'll see you in the next one. Ciao. And look at the app navbar. You have a completely empty